Your guide to the truth. TheNewAmericanMedia.com.
Broadcasting to you live from the Milky Way galaxy, the solar system, planet Earth, North America, the United States of America, California, Los Angeles, to be specific. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very, unsettling episode of Agree to Disagree. My name is Brian Engelman, and I'm going to be your host. And this is a special day, a special time, and unfortunately, I don't know, I can't even say this is a special case. Not in a good way, obviously, but I don't even know if this is a unique case. In fact, it has me wondering how many people have done this before and gotten away with it before the advent of cell phone cameras. So I got a lot of stuff bouncing through my head, and I've invited our good friend Ben to join our program. And we're going to talk about this case in just a second, but real quick, I want to make sure that if you haven't been to our site before, you check it out. It's called thenewamericanmedia.com. On the right-hand side, it's the TNAM radio button, because the news always matters. Click play, listen live, that's how you find these shows. We send out alerts whenever we do these guerrilla pop-up radio transmissions. While they allow us to have the internet, we're going to use it against them to seek truth, challenge dogma, and have fun. So you go to the homepage, thenewamericanmedia.com, click play, listen live on the TNAM radio link. Underneath that are two other things. Facebook. You can also do a search on Facebook for The New American Media with spaces in between and like the page. And also our Twitter feed is on there. We're at American_media_. And subscribe, youtube.com/The New American Media. Leave comments, check out our 4 years of content over there. But it's really important that you guys are connected with us on all these various levels, because when things are happening and, you know, maybe we're not at the control center, maybe we're not going to do a radio show for a few days to upload onto the homepage or to YouTube, we're going to be tweeting like crazy. We'll be putting content on Facebook, etc. And we ask you, the citizen journalists out there, to tag us at American_media_ when the big news stories are breaking, so that we all help each other here. You know, we don't have the budgets of Fox and MSNBC, and hopefully we have a little bit better editing abilities, abilities to decipher through the BS than some of those networks do in a lot of their lower moments. So, the reason we are on this story today, it's been kind of crossing on my radar, and I've seen it. Unfortunate part about this is, I saw, so-and-so shot by a cop. You're like, okay, I've seen this so many times. I said, well, these are a dime a dozen these days. You see this stuff happen all the time. So-and-so, in you just different city, change the names, and it's the same story, and we're so desensitized to it. But this is one of the first that we've actually seen. This it was not quite hands up, don't shoot, but this was literally a dude getting shot in the back. And so that's kind of what makes this Walter Scott situation stand out a little bit more, but we'll get to that in a second. First, I want to bring Ben into the program again. Ben, welcome back, sir. How you doing tonight?
Hey, Brian, great to be on with you, man. I wish it were under better circumstances with respect to the story, but always good to talk to you, man.
Hey, thanks for being back here, and I'll tell you what, we'll make it up coming up soon here. We'll do a sports show on the Unhappy Hour, and we'll talk some Cleveland Cavs, Cleveland Indians, Cleveland Browns, maybe Ohio State Buckeyes, because as we like to do sometimes, those are happier times, hopefully, and maybe I'll see you at the parade once the Cavs win. Those will be happy times, even though the Tribe dropped 1-2-0 yesterday against the Stros. I digress. We digress. We're here today because, this story that's kind of been, it's not red-linked on Drudge Report. It's on there, but it's a little bit more than a blurb at this point. But now everything's breaking loose because they've decided to, the case has developed since, earlier. I guess let me bring you in and catch us up to speed. What's going on here? What happened? Because you were kind of the ones maybe about an hour and a half ago. You're like, hey man, what do you think about this? And I took a close look. I went, whoa, not good. Yeah. Thank you for cameras. Sure. But yeah, let's set us up with all the basics that we need to know about this story here.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just tell your listeners who I am, I guess. I'm a kind of a semi-regular contributor to the New American Media. I know we check in on certain stories, particularly stories that sometimes catch my attention, and you and I will kind of connect on Twitter on it, and sometimes do these kind of impromptu discussions on it, which I think is great. If anybody's interested in connecting with me on social media or kind of following some of the things that I follow in terms of the news, geopolitics, finance, things like that, Twitter is definitely the best way to reach me, and that's at Exis10tial. It's EXIS10tial is the handle. But to your question, you mentioned Walter Scott and the shooting. What's unique about this story? A couple of things, Brian. I mean, for one, we're just on the cusp of the story breaking. It's only been about 3, 4, maybe 5 hours that it's been picked up by national media. The local media had broke this story just, I think, about maybe 10 or 12 hours ago. So earlier today, when the announcement actually came that the officer in question is going to be charged with murder, which is kind of what broke the story into the national headlines. As you mentioned, what else is unique about the story is that there's actual videotape footage of the actual shooting happening in real time. And it's deeply disturbing. I mean, as you pointed out, it was a guy literally getting shot in his back, 8 rounds that I could count that this guy squeezed off.
Yeah, 8 was the number that I had as well. I believe that's, and it was up until that 8th one. I think this guy was still alive.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point. People, you mentioned desensitization. A lot of folks watch these action movies as well, and violence on television, and they have this whole idea of what it's like when a person gets shot. I think that's another interesting point to this. As you pointed out, he continued to run until that last shot hit him, and he was hit multiple times. So when a person's shot, it's not like the movies where they just fly backwards 3 feet and fall down
in slow motion.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of times people don't even realize they're hit when they're shot, particularly with something of that caliber. I'm assuming the police officer had a 9mm caliber weapon, which is standard issue for a police officer. So that you brought up a good point by mentioning that. But the interesting piece to this, the other layer that we haven't touched on yet, is the fact that there's a racial element to this, and that the police officer was white, the victim here, Walter Scott, being a black man. I got to tell you, Brian, I watched a little bit of the CNN coverage a little bit earlier tonight, and it's so rare that you're going to hear me say this, but I actually give them a little bit of credit. They did kind of approach the story objectively as it relates to the racial element to this case, although the typical characters, guys like Charles Blow, guys like Van Jones, were on panels on some of these primetime shows discussing this issue, and of course pandered to the race element a little bit more. But my take on the story is that this is a story where it's very clear evidence of police brutality. I think there's absolutely no question about that. But the racial element is what fascinates me, and I'm curious to see as the days pass if that racial narrative is going to get picked up not only by the usual suspects. I mean, I think we know like Think Progress and Vox and the Daily Cost. These are places that are going to take the racial angle and absolutely run with it because that's what they do. My question
can we all agree? But before we get to your question, and hold that thought, I don't want you to lose that. But
Sure.
Much like a lot of us are begging and pleading, hey, can we just keep all Clintons and Bush away from the 2016 election? Can we also hopefully agree that maybe we should keep Al Sharpton at least 400 yards away from this case at all times and just let it happen? He's been charged with murder. We have video. We don't need somebody stirring things up into a race war to set a city on fire again.
Well,
maybe.
Well, listen. Here's the larger point, I guess, before I make the point that I was just going to make, which is that, I think you have somewhere a little over 1,000 police shootings that result in death every year in this country. And I'm fuzzy on the numbers exactly, but you have a pretty good number. And think back to yourself, how many of these police killings do you see on television that are covered to this degree? My point is the only ones that you do see have a racial underlying storyline. And that is the key here because people are only aware of, at the water cooler when they're talking work, people are only aware of the shootings that get covered by media, right? So when people talk about a pattern of white cops killing black people, that's only because those are the shootings that have been pandered to them through the media, right? If you actually look at the numbers, and there's some debate on whether these numbers are completely accurate because there's not a lot of transparency with respect to these specific numbers. But there is not a huge disparity where black people are being killed by police officers far more than white. There's actually conflicting data. There's some data out there that points to the fact that whites are being killed at a far greater rate by police officers than blacks are. However, there's other data that seems to suggest that it's somewhat even. But my point is that people are only aware of the shootings that the media covers. And let's face it, racial division sells. You know, you mentioned Al Sharpton. There's a reason why he's a millionaire. I mean, I know he owes millions of dollars back taxes,
True.
but there's a reason he made his fortune. He did it by pimping race. And I mean, that's what major networks do because that's what gets people tuned in. So the whole thing here is there's more of a social conditioning element to this. You have to look at the greater picture and realize, you know, we're only being fed a certain narrative. The only shootings where police officers are killing people are the ones that fit the narrative. Let me give you 5 examples here, Brian.
Yeah.
Let's start with James Whitehead, Texas, 2013. White man killed by a black cop. This was actually an interesting case. This is one of those sovereign citizen situations where, you know, I guess he had gone to take in a stray cat or something. They asked for his paperwork.
Oh,
and he
yeah.
showed them. Okay. So there's that one. There's Gilbert
No,
Collier.
I know. I cut you off on that. He went in. What was it? A stray cat, and then they started asking for his paperwork. He's like, "Leave me alone. I'm just here to drop
And he's
off a
sovereign
cat."
citizen. That's correct.
Yeah, I'm a
Okay,
sovereign
let's move
citizen.
on.
You don't have no authority over me. Leave me alone. Keep my ID out of it. Blah blah blah. And then they started getting all up on him, and he's like, "Hey, get the heck away from me!" And then it escalated, and he was killed.
By a black cop. Gilbert
That was
Collier.
a weird one. Okay, I'm sorry. Next one is Gilbert too.
Let me go on here, man. Just let me go through these. Gilbert Collier, white kid, Alabama, 2012, killed by a black cop. Ever heard that name? I doubt it. How about Dylan Taylor, Utah, 2014, white kid, killed by a black cop? Ever heard that name? Probably not. You did a great job covering the Kelly Thomas case. He was killed in California, 2011, by a Hispanic cop. How about Robert Lawrence, Alabama, 2014? It's suspected that he was killed by a black cop, but you know what? They never actually released the name of the police officer after the issue. If you do just a cursory search on Google of white people killed by black police officers, you're going to find dozens of examples, okay? So, again, to reiterate my initial point, we're only fed the stories through mainstream media that fit the narrative. White people being killed by black cops does nothing to further the narrative. So I think that's why I'm so interested in watching this case over the coming days to see to what degree do they play up this racial element. Because the other fact of the matter that I want to mention, and when you watch the video, it's almost a subtlety that I think a lot of people may not even recognize when they first watch the video because it doesn't happen until later in the video, far after the shots are fired. But the second police officer that's on the scene that witnesses this police officer actually pick up his taser, because if you do listen to the dispatch call when he called in to report the incident, he actually says, "I shot him because he took my taser," which he apparently had tried to taser this man. It didn't bring him down, and then he fled, and that's when the shots were fired. So the second officer on the scene actually watches the police officer walk back to the point where he fired the initial shots, pick up the taser that had been dropped on the ground in the, I don't even want to call it struggle, but in the altercation. He brings the taser back and drops it next to the body as if to plant it there. Second officer sees all of this, and by the way, the second officer is black. And by the way, the second officer has not been arrested. So if we see this racial element played up further as it relates to this story, then I become very suspicious of the story in general. And I refute any racial involvement in this case whatsoever. I just am concerned that that's going to be the prevailing narrative, similar to as it was with the George Zimmerman, similar as it was with Mike Brown and Ferguson. You know, you and I talked about the Eric Garner case in New York, which was an egregious example of police brutality. And, you know, it's funny because that story didn't get nearly the traction that Mike Brown did, who was, in fact, a criminal. And it was a justified killing in that case. But it's funny because the Eric Garner case, where it probably was a questionable killing, that's the story that gets buried. So I want people to take this all, you know, in context and look at the bigger picture, because you know, it's all the divisive racial stuff is what's being shoved down our throats. It's not the reality of the situation. And that's, I just want people to have that perspective.
Well, a couple points to make. At the very beginning of this footage, and I'm going to play it here in a second just so you can listen to it. It's just a couple seconds long. It's a 3-minute clip. This is a 26-second clip of it, just to get a feel for it. Someone comes running down there with the camera, and it just reminds me that it is so important that we require. These are our employees. You know, we have a legal system here for when there are beefs to sort out. We have a legal system for that, and the fact that we could have a situation where you have executioners, that is not their job to execute. And when you hit somebody that's not attacking you and trying to end your life, you don't have the ability to just shoot people in the back. We cannot, especially in a day and age where people are, police stations, forces all across the United States are getting MRAPs, getting surplus tanks and militarized gear from Iraq and Afghanistan. The police are becoming militarized. You cannot have someone walking around thinking they're judge, jury, and executioner. That is not their job to shoot somebody 8 times in the back, however many times they actually got shot. We're going to find out at the murder trial for sure. And you made a good point. But at the very beginning of this video, there is an altercation. They're facing each other, and you can see it was almost like their hands were slapping at each other. There was something that happened very quick, and as soon as you saw something happen, he took off and started running. So by the time we got the footage, we kind of missed what led up to all of this. We don't have that information yet. Hopefully this officer was wearing a body camera. I'm not holding my breath. I haven't heard anything about that yet. Now, you made another point about grabbing the taser and dropping the taser. It reminded me of that Dave Chappelle skit, where just sprinkle some crack on him. You shoot whoever you want, and then you just sprinkle some crack on him, and it's like, oh, nope, that was justifiable. Here was a crack dealer, and he came after me. He reached for my gun. That's kind of the standard piece of information that every officer is told. If you're in a shooting, you just say, he reached for my gun, or my life was in danger, he tried to whatever. And sometimes that is the truth, and sometimes it might not be the truth. But also for this guy, I don't know that this is a guy. No, it is, because I can hear him. The one that shot the footage. What do you make of this person? Because you see the officer after he fires his 8th shot, he turns and looks at the dude on the other side of the chain link fence. Looks at him. It was almost like, oh crap. What do you make of the actions of the citizen that continued filming even after that point and going even closer? I don't know that I would have gotten closer for fear of them trying to come over and smash my camera to pieces, try to take me out as a witness. You never know. What do you make of the whole situation of the citizen journalist that documented this?
Well, 2 points of clarification on what you just said. Number one, the police officer was not wearing a body cam. That's confirmed. Number two, the initial altercation that took place off camera before the footage started, it's reported that that's when the tasing actually took place. The taser wasn't effective in bringing him down for whatever reason. He fled apparently after that, and that's the footage that we're not seeing.
Right.
As it relates to him going back and picking up the item and bringing it back, it's speculatively the taser. That's my personal speculation after watching the tape and watching it. In some cases, particularly slowed down and enhanced on that specific moment. My assumption is it's a taser, but that's certainly nothing that's been confirmed.
And we're trying to gather all this info as it breaks. It's always tricky when you cover stories as they're happening because you're still trying to sift through the hearsay and it was that, but we're not exactly sure.
Sure.
So a lot of these finer point details, these are going to be hashed out over the days and weeks to come. But, I mean,
sure.
Back to the guy that took the footage. I mean, what do you make of this? Because someone clearly heard something going on, and you could hear them running over there with their camera to capture it. I mean, what do you make of the whole situation of the person that filmed it?
First of all, I didn't see at any point the police officer actually acknowledge the person filming, which I found to be very bizarre. It seemed to me from the perspective of the camera that this was a person that was in plain sight. They were on the other side of a chain link fence. There was no trees or shrubage that would have blocked the police officer's view, or the other police officer's view for that matter, who entered the scene after the shots were fired. So to me, that's a very bizarre angle in that the police officer didn't seem to notice or see this person. My assumption is if you point out when he may have gestured over or potentially moved his head in the direction of the person filming, if he had, I would have had a sense after the shots were fired and he was, kind of lingering around the body, he would have been constantly shooting his head back and keeping an eye on whoever had a camera on him, which he didn't do. So in my estimation, based on his body language, he didn't know he was being filmed. So, in terms of the guy taking the footage, I mean, I give him a ton of credit. I mean, that took some serious stones, man, because, you just watch the guy shoot somebody in cold blood and you're going to put a camera on him, which, I hope to think that I would do the same thing in that situation. But, you got to give this guy credit. I mean, he did the right thing. And, it brings up another interesting topic, which is, I saw some of the reaction on Twitter, which I want to talk about the Twitter and social media reaction as well to this.
Sure.
After this, we kind of hashed through this point. But, you had people on Twitter that were talking about, man, talk about knee-jerk reaction here. People are like, well, thank God there was a camera on this guy, which I agree with. But then their second statement was, well, we need cameras everywhere. And it's like, whoa, buddy, slow down, man. You mentioned citizen journalism, and people, obviously people with smartphones have the ability to film in almost any situation.
Right.
But let's not get out of hand and say we're going to build an infrastructure of surveillance, which, I mean, Christ, how far down that road are we already? But for people to have a knee-jerk reaction, say we need cameras everywhere, that's where you got to kind of tap the brakes, man, and get people to come back down to reality.
Did you happen to catch the Edward Snowden footage where the interview with John Oliver came out a couple days ago?
I didn't see the interview. I saw some of the quotes from the interview. I will just, anecdotally say that I think it's interesting that a guy like Snowden, who has delivered so much just absolutely precious information to the American public, it's interesting that he's rarely in the media spotlight, unless he's talking to a comedian. Most people
about dick pics
anymore.
About dick
Right.
pics. Although John Oliver's been doing some amazing stuff. He covered the policing for profit angle down in Ferguson and elsewhere, which was very important. Something Ben Swan has been definitely delving into. He covered the NCAA hypocrisy about to the lengths they went to avoid paying their students and cutting scholarships if people get injured. And I'll tell you what, John Oliver has impressed the hell out of me. I thought he should have got that Daily Show gig. They should have paid him out of that HBO contract. I think Comedy Central's making a big mistake not going after him and finding a way to get that opt-out clause from HBO because he's doing great stuff. But yeah, it is interesting that you're only really seeing Snowden stuff when he's talking about dick pics for 20 minutes with a comedian. But any conversation about surveillance continues the conversation. Anytime we can further ponder what it means to have cameras on every corner, like you said, the Twitter reaction in this case. It's something I'll just paraphrase Snowden, but he said, that the government has all the tools to point a gun and aim it at your head and say, don't worry, we're not going to pull the trigger. And that's kind of what the surveillance state is turning into. But
let me say two things,
yeah,
Brian. I don't mean to cut you off. Two things. Number one, as it relates to NSA spying that we're talking about, and people need to understand this, okay? The NSA is simply arbitrarily spying on you and capturing all your digital communications and then saying, all right, well, we're only going to use it if we suspect you of terrorism. That's like me robbing your house, okay, and taking all your valuables and then leaving the house, but I'm not guilty of robbery until I sell it, right? It's the same thing as the government saying about stealing your data.
It's all blackmail, yeah.
That's right. So that's that part of it. But, this whole, just the whole surveillance angle, again, it's interesting to see how people react to these types of things in such an emotional way. And it goes back to show you. I mean, there was a USA Today article that broke today that talked about how the fact that we've actually been spying on phone calls since 1992.
Yeah, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, right?
That's right. And to think that information is not shared with agencies like the NSA and CIA and FBI and all of our other intelligence apparatus is absurd. Of course they share that.
And it's not like the DEA is involved with drug cartels and prostitution Oh, wait. Yeah, I guess they are. So they might not be the most trustworthy,
that's right.
uncorruptible people out there.
That's right. And the point is this. That started in 1992. So we had a decade worth of surveillance happening before 9/11. It didn't prevent 9/11, obviously, but yet 9/11 is the excuse they've used to expand the program because it didn't work the first time, right? Didn't prevent 9/11, yet now we're going to say, hey, more of this NSA spying is going to prevent the next one. Now, if you guys are willing to buy that, man, I've got some, oceanfront property in Arizona for you, bud.
Well, according to Maynard James Keenan, learn to swim, see you down in Arizona Bay. At some point, it's going to happen. Hey, I just want to play this for people. It's just a couple of seconds, just to get a feel for what's going on. I don't know, maybe I'll try to narrate as it's going. Somebody has a cell phone camera, and they're kind of running over. There's like this sidewalk or driveway or some piece of pavement, and then stones, and then some grass and a chain link fence, and this is how it starts here. Video made available to the New York Times. So he's by a tree. It's all shaky through the leaves. Okay, something is smacked out of a hand. Count the shots. No, man, I'm telling you, right there. After that shot, hold on. He turns and looks right at the cameraman real quick. Turns and who knows? Maybe he thought he saw something and just he's got tunnel vision at this point, because they say when you actually have to discharge your weapon, you do get tunnel vision. But he looks right over at the guy filming him. And this is the deal. This is what's going on. I just want to talk about this real quick. The postingcourier.com about the video footage. It says the 3-minute clip of Saturday's shooting starts shaky, but it steadies as Slager and Scott. I guess we should explain who these are. Walter L. Scott is a Navy veteran and father, 50-year-old black man. And they say a white North Charleston police officer who has been arrested on a murder charge, and the FBI opened a civil rights investigation Tuesday. And once again, I agree with you. What's with the civil rights stuff? Why does he have to be a white police officer? Why does the guy have to be a black guy? It's a human being, shot another human being. He was running away. I don't think that's protocol. It's pretty damn clear. But Walter L. Scott is the Navy veteran and father who died Saturday after Patrolman First Class Michael T. Slager, 33-year-old, shot him several times in the back. The video footage with the Post-Courier obtained Tuesday from a source who asked to remain anonymous shows the end of the confrontation between the two on Saturday after Scott ran from a traffic stop. It was the first piece of evidence contradicting an account Slager gave earlier this week through his attorney. So one of the points I want to make here is well, if you're out there and you witness something, if you see something, here's the key. You need to get your footage out to everybody. And I'll tell you what, we can be one of those places. You can send it to us. Find us. If it's the right thing, we'll put it out there. But that's one of the big keys. Remember, Andrew Breitbart had some bombshell information to release, but he was killed before he died of natural causes before he released anything. But the point is, if you find something so radioactive in your hand, you're like, oh my God, could somebody retaliate against me? Will the thin blue line come and get me to silence me and intimidate me from being a witness? Am I going to release the footage? Release the footage. So now to the footage. It says a 3-minute clip of Saturday's shooting starts shaky, steadies as Slager and Scott, now I've explained, appear to be grabbing at each other's hands. Slager said through his attorney that Scott had wrestled his taser from him during a struggle. The video appears to show Scott slapping at the officer's hands as several objects fall to the ground. It's not clear what the objects are. Scott starts running away. Wires from Slager's taser stretch from Scott's clothing to the officer's hands. With Scott more than 10 feet from Slager, the officer draws his pistol and fires 7 times in rapid succession. After a brief pause, the officer fires one last time. Scott's back bows, and he falls face first to the ground near a tree. After the gunfire, Slager glances at the person taking the video, then talks on his radio. The cameraman curses. Slager yells at Scott as sirens wail. Put your hands behind your back, the officer shouts before he handcuffs Scott. As another lawman runs to Scott's side, and Scott died there. So, not immediately available how many times, confirmation how many times Scott was shot, and this he's been charged. He's been charged with murder here.
Okay. So basically, that just confirmed everything that we had talked about, although they do mention the glance towards the person with the camera. Although I would, again, contend that by his body language and his behavior after the shots, he may not have realized that that person was videotaping him, because if he had, my sense is, and certainly if I were in his shoes, I'd be glancing over at that person pretty consistently and maybe even saying something to him, like maybe get out of here or something like that. The fact he didn't do that tells me maybe he didn't know he was filming.
And I'll agree with you. That was very weird where both the second officer and the first officer are by the deceased, and the guy's right there with the camera, and they're not really paying any attention to him at all. And if there's somebody, that could be somebody's best friend, you never know. You'd be taught, number one, back up, step away from the fence, put down whatever's in your head, like that. So yeah, you might be onto something there, but it is strange. But thank God it's on camera. I really just wonder how many times these things have happened, and then they sprinkle some cocaine on him, or they move the taser and say he went for my gun. All these lies that I just wonder how many times this has happened before.
Well, the other point is the fact that he's been charged with murder.
Right.
In
Quickly.
similar instances, yeah, you haven't seen this happen within a week of the shooting like this is happening. And actually, I'm not sure if it was his superior or the guy who runs their department, but they did the police department did a a press conference and talked about this issue. And, the guy basically came out and said, hey, look, when you're wrong, you're wrong. And that's a quote. He said, when you're wrong, as he addressed the situation. And that's essentially what led to these murder charges. So obviously the department is sufficiently convinced that this guy killed a guy in cold blood. So I think that's an important point. Now, one other point I do want to make, and this is a little bit on the uglier side, because you do have those people that are going to blindly support the police because, in a lot of cases, you have people that are just so institutionalized this way that that's how they're going to think. Now, you have people out there that are trying to basically say, hey, this Walter guy, maybe he wasn't such a great guy. Apparently, he didn't pay his child support. Apparently, he was arrested for assault something like 10 years ago. So there's people that are going to bring those things up as well. But listen, it's in my view, especially with the very immediate murder charges, I just can't see this case going any other way than second-degree murder.
Man, now why second degree instead of first degree?
Well, first degree requires premeditation. Obviously, this guy didn't plot this happening. He obviously reacted in a situation that's second-degree murder.
Unless he's related to the mother who hasn't been getting the child support payments. Of course, now we're just getting wacky here. But
sure,
I just want to...
And hey, Brian, but not to cut you up, but that very well may be the case. I mean, this is a case we've been talking about for, the last 4 or 5 hours, so we're just starting to dig into it. There may be other layers to it that we're not aware of, but yeah, in my estimation, it's second-degree murder. Yeah,
there's no idea no information to support something like that. But, at this point, it's time to throw ideas and theories out there and check and support. Is there any proof behind this? Any evidence supporting this claim, or is there not evidence that that could contradict it completely? But I just want to say I watched the video with Eric Garner. I was convinced that officer was going to jail. That didn't happen. I saw Kelly Thomas beaten to death after the cop puts on latex gloves and says, you see these fists? They're getting ready to F you up, and they beat him to a bloody pulp and kill him on camera, and they walked. So I don't know what it takes to convict a police officer these days.
Well, again, the key difference is, in this case, murder charges were brought about like that. In all the cases you just mentioned, there was extensive investigations before any charges were ever brought. And, the other thing here is context, obviously. You've got a lot of residual tension from Mike Brown, somewhat from Eric Gardner, although, as we talked about, that story didn't get nearly the traction. But then, of course, all these Ferguson protests, you get all this residual hate and all this residual discontent, geared towards police officers and white versus black and all this. So you got that whole context, and you got a DOJ that's frothing at the mouth. Even though Holder's, supposed to step down, Loretta Lynch hasn't been confirmed yet. You still got Holder running the show. He's going to go after this case and try to find a civil rights issue. That's just the fact. I mean, DOJ, as far as I know, and I think I saw this later today, was the fact they've already launched their own investigation. So that does not surprise me.
Yeah, this says U.S. Department of Justice said in a statement that with FBI investigators would work close with the state law enforcement division, which typically investigates officer-involved shootings in South Carolina, and the state's attorney general to investigate any civil rights violations in Scott's death. In the quote you referenced earlier, North Charleston Mayor Keith Summey, Summey, said during a news conference that Slager had made, quote, a bad decision. Quote, when you're wrong, you're wrong. If you make a bad decision, don't care if you're behind the shield or just a citizen on the street. You have to live by that decision. I thought Eric Holder was out of here. He's still hanging around. Is he going to inject himself into this one as one last hurrah before he gets out the door?
Of course he is. Well, he's not. He has officially announced that he will resign once a replacement has been confirmed by Congress. So he's still the guy until this Lynch gal gets her day. And frankly, I'm not a fan of Loretta Lynch. I do hope that, in fact, that she's not confirmed, but that's another matter for another day.
Yeah, I suppose so. And I don't know. I guess if is this a case, do you think, with this Walter Scott? If Barack Obama had a brother, he would look like Walter Scott. Is that the case?
You know what? I'm just not sure. Like I said, I'm really anxious and curious to see over the next couple of days how this is positioned in the media. If they do take this racial angle and run with it, based on just the conversation you and I just had, I think anybody listening to it that's objective could see right through that if that in fact happens. I mean, this is obviously not, in my view, not a racially motivated crime. Even if there is an element of race in this, I just don't know how you can actually demonstrably prove it I think at the end of the day...
But is
police
any of this
brutality-
racism stuff, do you think any of these racism claims are ever about proof? It's
Listen,
just well, hey, that guy was
no,
black
listen.
and that person was white, so that's an evil whitey, and we're always getting
Listen,
beat up by the
stop
man.
right there, because police brutality and racial issues in the United States are two different things. Let's just start there.
I would like to make that clear distinction, but to the people who always see everything in a racial prism, they don't have the capability to differentiate the two.
Well, if they're listening to the show, they just heard me list off 5 or 6 examples of white guys being killed by black cops, and they've never heard those names. So I think we've sufficiently shown within the 15, 20 minutes we've talked that, look, it's not about racial bias. Like I said earlier, man, we're only fed the stories that we get from media. When you're sitting around the water cooler, people aren't picking stuff out of, obscure news headlines and quoting stuff. All they're hearing is what's on CNN, what's on CBS, what's on ABC, what's on Fox News. That's what they're hearing, man. And none of the narratives of these examples I gave, plus dozens of others, are going to touch on examples that don't fit the narrative, like we talked about. But there's one last thing I want to mention about the case, and that's the fact that a police report has been filed, and that is part of the issue in terms of some of these inconsistencies, where the police officer, for instance, says that his taser had been taken from him. That's part of the police report that he filed. Okay? Now, that's the key here is, I mentioned the second cop that came in towards the end of the clip.
Right.
Well, that cop signed off on the police report, said basically agreed with everything that this guy said, or maybe they made joint statements, whatever. They were consistent. So in my view, I'm curious to see if that second cop was arrested for being complicit.
Did Michael Brown's stepfather get arrested for inciting a riot? No.
Yeah, but that wasn't part of the actual killing. That was something that took place after the fact. We're talking about something that's taking place at the crime scene in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, and that would be assuming that this officer wasn't paying it, because it sure seemed like that second person on scene cared a lot more about the guy who's been shot multiple times on the ground than the guy that did the pulling of the trigger. Maybe he wasn't paying as much attention to what the guy was going back to do, and he was more calling in the ambulance and checking on this guy's vitals.
Brian, neither officer attempted CPR. Police officers are very well trained in how to give CPR.
Okay, good point. And like I said, I've only seen this a couple of times. I got to go back and watch. It is very shocking. It's very jarring. It's jarring footage, and I will put the link to this so that you can see it in the full version, get as much of the information that you can get, and start picking it apart and noticing things. Well, I mean, it's just kind of like you said. You didn't see the glance over right after the 8th shot. That was something that jumped out to me. One of the things that jumped out to you was that, we're all going to pick different parts of this out and for, additional layers of scrutiny in the hours and days and weeks to come. But I think that's the most important part here is we're not jumping to instant conclusions about damn near anything. We're just saying, wow, it's very good this guy was there to film the case. It probably would have been covered up, or at least attempted to be covered up, without the footage. I am glad that this is going to a trial for murder, and let's get the rest of the evidence that we can. I think calm, cool investigation is what's required here. The last thing I want to see is Ferguson again. That was terrible.
Well, everybody is due their due process, obviously. And you mentioned Ferguson. And again, it goes back to I keep saying this, man. That's why the next few days are so critical in terms of media coverage in this, because if they do send Sharpton and Jesse Jackson in there, we've got a big problem on our hands, man, because there's a lot of people that, are part of that following, that are going to eat up this racial, baiting. And that's the dangerous thing. We saw it in Ferguson. There's no question that there's a risk of that happening again. But how responsible is national media going to be with their handling of the story is the big question.
Right.
And, based on our, 20, 30-minute conversation here, maybe more, the key takeaway here is race. I'm not sure that there's any proof here. There's no compelling proof that race should somehow be injected into this incident. Okay? You've got a black cop and a white cop on the scene. Obviously a black victim, but I don't think there's any history with this police officer. I guess there's been history of him with abusing his power as a police officer. I did read some stories in which he's had some issues inadvertently using a taser in the past and maybe using some excessive force in the past, although none of it's indicating that it was racially motivated. So, again, I think the racial element is something that's a dangerous element of this story, and I think just looking at it, I think the reason it's going to linger in the headlines is because of the racial element. The reason it lingers in the headlines is not going to be because it was such an egregious police brutality example. The reason it'll linger in the headlines is because of the race element, and that's something that scares me. And if, in fact, it is the case, something that disappoints me.
Well, to further that point and kind of start wrapping this up here, it says at the time Scott was wanted for an arrest on a family court warrant. So I mean that is something when people's name and information is ran through the computer, that stuff pops up. That's what Charleston County Sheriff Major Eric Watson said Tuesday. This guy Scott had a history of arrests related to contempt of court charges for failing to pay child support. The only accusation of violence against Scott during his lifetime came through an assault and battery charge way back in 1987. Then to cover the police officer, Slager, a former Coast Guardsman with 2 stepchildren and a wife who's expecting a child, served for more than 5 years with the department without being disciplined. 2 people filed complaints against Slager during his time at the force, including one man who said the policeman shot him with a taser for no reason in September 2013. Internal investigators exonerated the officer of any wrongdoing, though the suspect in that case was never arrested. Actually, that's kind of interesting when you read it. It's one of those, don't worry, we've investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. I'm sure you've seen that meme.
It's exactly what I just said. It happened. Had just recited some of those facts that you just mentioned just 2 minutes ago before we got into that aspect of it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's all on the table. People can draw whatever conclusions objectively that they want from what's going on. I just hope again that the media coverage on the issue is responsible. I think that's the biggest concern from my perspective.
Okay, then going out the door here, because we'll get more information as it pops. Thank you for joining us on this kind of quick impromptu show. A couple quick hits and we'll let you get out the door.
Sure.
Now there's accusations that the Russians have hacked the White House and accessed Obama's information. That reminds me of the Sony hack, blame North Korea, what is really behind it, did it really happen, etc. Any take on that story yet?
Well, I think if I recall correctly, you and I connected on the North Korea case, and I was very adamant about the fact that was laughable, the notion that North Korea would hack Sony Pictures. I'm not sure we connected on it, but
I did do a show with a cybersecurity expert on it, and he said, yeah, to claim that is pretty ridiculous for all of these reasons, and that's all in the archive as well.
Yeah, totally laughable. As it relates to the Russian hack, my first reaction to it is hearkening back to 2012 when Mitt Romney was ridiculed for saying that Russia was our number one geopolitical foe. But man, the liberals sure laughed that one up at the time. It's funny. Now here we are dealing with the Crimea situation and Ukraine, Russia, a huge player in
the Arctic. Let's not forget all the activities in the Arctic Circle and trying to drill for new land
shooting down a Malaysian jet. There's a ton of.
How many of them? 1 or 2? Anyway, yeah.
Well, the whole point is, who's laughing now? I mean, what a joke. I mean, matter of fact, just for fun, if any of you guys listening, just go back and look back at some of the 2012 debates. I mean, it's laughable. And then challenge your Democrat friends or liberal friends. And look, to be clear, I'm not a Republican. I do lean a little bit conservative, but I do not support the Republican Party as an establishment. So I don't want anybody to think I'm like slanted here because I'm an equal opportunity basher when it comes to big government. But, challenge one of your liberal or Democrat friends to go back to the 2012 debates and just give you one example on an issue that Obama was right. Because you're probably not going to see him for a while because that's a tough one. So anyway, my reaction to the story, Brian, of course, this is happening. I mean, Russia's been a geopolitical foe clearly throughout the past, not only several years, but particularly in the past year. I think that story is another one that's kind of still developing and then just hit the headlines today in terms of, what information was gleaned from a hack like that. I know they said that the president's day-to-day schedule was one of the things that's obviously sensitive just for his safety. There was something that was compromised. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out in the international stage. But right now, man, Russia's playing chess, man. We're playing checkers.
Oh Lord, I'll have more flexibility after my final election. He leans in and says to Putin a couple of years ago. Remember that one? And Mitt Romney, the guy that was too dumb to be president, finished 99.9 percentile in the 0.01 percentile of picking the NCAA bracket. So, go figure. The guy does know something about something. Two quick things. Also, Rand Paul has announced his candidacy, joining Ted Cruz in the 2016 early goings. Thoughts on either Cruz, Paul, or both?
Well, I'll give you thoughts on both. I really like Cruz, and that probably puts me, in the minority for a lot of the mainstream types. He's easily vilified. People they vilify the Tea Party so easily and stuff like that. Take all that out of it and just look at the core of the politics. I like both candidates. I think Cruz probably has a little bit less of a chance to garner the nomination. I think Rand Paul has a better chance, and I like Rand Paul, although he's softening on certain stances, which I find a little bit interesting. I mean, we've talked about this before in the past, Brian. One of the key problems with our political system is this two-party system and this primary system that feeds into it, the general elections, and that, as a candidate for one of the major parties, you can't really be a hardline candidate. You have to compromise your views in order to win a primary. So you can't really stay completely genuine as a candidate. So there's never going to be a perfect candidate in that sense. And you see that happening right now with Rand Paul. He's kind of shifting a little bit with his approach to, for instance.
If you're gonna go on Sean Hannity for an hour, you better have some neocon in you. You better kowtow to some of the Israel line a little bit more in the I noticed even today. I was watching, going, wow, Rand is definitely air quote clarifying some of his positions here. Whew. Right. Yeah. But then he also bashed the neocons, very bluntly in a lot of ways, while saying, I'm kind of like this, but not like these clowns,
Well, here's what I'm trying to hope and tell myself, Brian, is that he's doing exactly what Obama did in 2008 and 2012, which is saying everything you need to say to get into office, any lies that you need to say, because this is politics after all, to get into office so that you can get in there and actually drive your ideological agenda. And, he's Apple hopefully doesn't fall far from the tree. I think you and I both supported his dad quite a bit. I think you and I would both agree he's not his dad, but I think the fundamental principles as it relates to the libertarian, kind of ideology, I really do think that he can stay true to that if in fact he does reach a general election. And I would venture to say if he does reach the general election as a Republican candidate, I definitely think he can beat Hillary Clinton. I think Hillary Clinton has so much baggage. I think the Benghazi issue, as well as now this server issue, these are going to be albatrosses around her neck in the general election without question.
Man, well, I thought there was no way Barack Obama could get a first term, let alone a second. I thought Kelly Thomas's murderers were going to get arrested and or serve jail time.
You're right.
I've been wrong before on slam dunks. I've been wrong on slam dunks before.
Well, that's my concern about it. Is Hillary Clinton, the coffers are deep. I mean, she's got enormous resources behind the Democrat machine, and that's the irony of it, Brian. These most of their core voters are anti-corporation. Let's get money out of politics. And look at the people that they're voting for. Are you kidding me? Look at Tim Cook this week, or this past week, talking about, we need to pull all of our businesses out of Indiana because these people, they hate gays so much they won't bake them cakes. And here he is, doing business in Qatar and Saudi Arabia where they cut gay people's heads off. I mean, give me a break. These people support this hypocrisy. So and look, I'm not saying Republicans, hardcore establishment Republicans are perfect. They're far from it. Most of them are just absolutely frothing for war 24/7.
Rand Paul was pretty much calling all those people out. Not so subtle jabs at the Bushes and the McCains and he blasted Lindsey Grahamnesty. Pretty interesting, right. but yeah, he said these guys are just frothing for war. To paraphrase. Absolutely.
I mean, you're seeing it with Iran. They want to try to antagonize there. They want to antagonize Russia, which is, suicidal. But listen, I think as it relates to the 2016 election, I think the Republicans are very well positioned to win the election. I do hope they do, although, again, I don't identify Republican, but I do think you need a counterbalance because this country legislatively, from a governmental standpoint, has shifted far left in 2008. And we're seeing the effects of it. Look at the economy. Look at the job participation rate. Look at the median income. Look down the street in your neighborhood, man. That's the thing that gets me. You don't look at this, 5.4 unemployment. People, they celebrate this number like it means something. I mean, we don't even calculate unemployment the same way as we did 10, 15 years ago. We totally changed the equation, man. You got people falling off the government unemployment rolls simply because their unemployment insurance runs out. The tap runs dry at some point. And what do? We just roll them off the number. So it's absurd the way we even calculate it. Look at the real metrics. Look at the real numbers. Look at median income. Look at job participation rate. And like I said, anecdotally, look down your street. I live here, as you know, Brian, in the city of Chicago, North Side, Lincoln Park, affluent area. I got several miles of real estate down North Clark Street, this retail space where I'm telling you, where I came here in 2007 or 8, it's probably 95% occupied. I walk down Clark Street right now from here, like let's say from Fullerton to Diversey, I'd say it's probably 40% occupied.
70% unoccupied, 60-70%. Wow.
That's right. That's right. From 60, probably from I'd say, like I said, 95% occupied to literally, half that. It's incredible. I mean, just look down your street, look around, talk to people. The economy is not improving. This whole issue about economic recovery is just so absurd to me. I can't believe people buy it. It's hard to believe. The only way people, I think, are really, being spoon-fed this and really kind of accepting it is because, all the major stock indices are reaching record highs.
Yeah, 18,000. How soon before the Dow bubble bursts at 18,000?
That's right. So that's the only thing the establishment has their, something to hang their hat on in terms of selling this idea of a recovery to people. So all those things are going to be issues in the 2016 election. Hopefully we can make it till then. Hopefully there's no, God willing, there's no catastrophic event.
No false flag, no black swan. Exactly. And
anything. Let's move the page. And like I said, we need a counterbalance to as far left as we've moved. I just want to at least see us move more towards the middle. A guy like Rand Paul is obviously going to help do that. Ted Cruz, God willing, he'd be great too. And I'm just saying this, just not Bush, man. I want to see a Republican win. If it's Scott Walker, hey, great. But just it can't be Bush.
Yeah, and for me, I would also like to see the Ralph Naders, the Gary Johnsons, and the Jesse Venturas jump up and just see how that shakes up the regular dynamic. I want to see that as well, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about the 2016 election. Hopefully we'll have you on for a longer show. Final question, since you brought it up, and we're getting close to it. Big news out of Chicago, not just Lincoln Park. And I'm not talking about Homan Square, although I haven't talked to you since Homan Square. So let me ask you, any thoughts on the Homan Square torture allegations, and any thoughts on Rahm Emanuel winning another term as Chicago mayor?
Well, the Homan Square issue is something that's very interesting and that has not gotten any traction whatsoever.
We've tried a couple of times, and we'll keep it up.
It's just so telling that it hasn't. And if people aren't familiar with the story, just Google it. There's basically a torture facility in the city of Chicago where you're seeing Guantanamo Bay type tactics being employed. So Google that, check it out. It's pretty disturbing, but it's nothing that's being covered in mainstream media. Rahm Emanuel winning the election, I think it's a really good sign that people are starting to kind of push back a little bit in that they forced the runoff, as opposed to him just winning the simple majority in the original election. But I think that's progress. Here's the problem. Obviously, Emanuel has just enormous resources to run a campaign and win an election, as opposed to this Chuy Garcia, who really was just a local guy with very limited resources, just as a business guy. So, he was way outmatched. But the big issue is this. One of the key issues was the red light camera issue. And man, Brian, if we had another hour, could I go on about that? That was Chuy Garcia's, kind of key issue where he wanted to remove the program, and he kind of pinned Rahm as the villain in that case, which he is. But here's the big problem. You've got this massive financial issue in Chicago with respect to, debt. You've got it.
Give Democrats an unrestrained control of things for any number of years. Look at Detroit. Look at Chicago. Look at the White House. You see what happened. Not that Bush was any better in the White House, but all these Democrat-run cities. The debt gets really bad real quick.
Well, the Chicago situation is not unlike Detroit at all. It's one of the worst you're seeing in the country, and it's all because of pension funding. You know, you've got all these government employees, municipal employees that are on pensions, and these guys are in such trouble, too, because their debt rating, Moody's has knocked them down to basically just a notch above the junk bonds. So the interest rates for this city to borrow money to fund this debt, it's not even really affordable at this point. So you get this massive issue of how do you close the gap, and Chuy Garcia really doesn't have a plan other than raising property taxes, which, as you can imagine, is highly unpopular.
Very unpopular for the producers, not for the moochers. Exactly.
That's right. So anyway, Brian, great to talk to you, man. I'm glad we could catch up on all this stuff. And, yeah, we got to hook up again on a show, maybe talk a little sports, but, talk a little bit about election 2016. Man, there's so much going on politically. And you know me, man. I'll talk about any issue, any topic. I'm always happy to.
Well, then you and I need to find a way to get something quasi-regularly scheduled. I don't know if it's once a year, once a week, once a month. We'll figure something out. I don't know what day of the week it's going to work, but we're taking the New American Media some different places this year. We've grown exponentially, almost at 500,000 video views on the YouTube channel, and things are really starting to move in a really good direction, and we'll make sure that you're a part of it. We'll talk off air, and we'll get that figured out, and in the meantime, go Tribe, go Cavs, and it's a fun time to be a Cleveland sports fan. Hopefully you can take in a game or two, and you and I will be talking more in the near future. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. And once again, hey, if anybody wants to just check me out on Twitter, it's at Exis10tial. It's EXIS10tial. And yeah, Brian, let's hook up, man. We'll be heading to opening day for Friday, so I'll have a beer for you.
Make it a Great Lakes Dortmunder Gold, would you?
That a boy. That's my man.
All right, buddy. Well, hey, we'll be talking again soon. Yeah, once again, follow Ben on Twitter. He's at Exis10tial, EXIS10tial, EXIS10tial. So for everybody here at the TNAM Radio Network, check out our homepage, thenewamericanmedia.com. Subscribe, youtube.com/thenewamericanmedia. On Twitter, we're at American_media_. And on Facebook, do a search for The New American Media with spaces in between and like the page. So, yeah, good to see that this guy is going to be facing the murder charge that he has earned. And we'll follow this case, let's take deep breaths, let calmer heads prevail, and, until then, keep seeking truth, challenging dogma, having fun. If you find some video footage, send it to us so that we can help you get it out there. The last thing you want is to hold on to it. I appreciate you, I love you, and peace.
Hi, everybody. You're listening to Agree to Disagree with Brian Engelman, and this is John B. Wells reminding you that not only is Brian Engelman a cool guy, and not only is the newamericanmedia.com a very cool platform, but here's a cool idea for you, too. Are you alone? Not really. Do you like dogs? Do you like cats? You do. Of course you do. Everybody does. One or the other, maybe even both. There are a lot of dogs and cats that are at shelters right now, and if somebody doesn't take them home, they're going to wind up euthanized. That's a nice way of saying they're going to be killed because there's simply not enough room. I guarantee it, the best dogs and the best cats, the best pets come from shelters. There's something about dogs and cats. They know. They know where they are. You walk through one of them, and certainly at least one is going to look at you and go, I wish you'd take me home. I'm in hell. Please take me out of here. It'll be the best thing that you ever did for your soul. You'll feel good about it. And not only that, but you have a friend for life. Doesn't matter if you got money, you don't have money. Well, it doesn't make any difference to a dog or cat. All they need is the sound of your voice and maybe even the stroke of your hand, and they're fine. Maybe a little food every once in a while. The sweetest sound that those pets ever hear is your voice. Think it over and adopt a cat or a dog from a local shelter today. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did.